Hi, this is Maria Mandarino, and thank you for being here today. Today we're going to talk about Enneagram 2. I have Stacey Donelson here with me today, and she leads with 2, so she's going to bring us some insight into the type, and I'll have Stacey explain a little bit more about what she does. But she is a doctor of acupuncture and Chinese medicine. And I'll have the links in the show notes to both of her businesses. Her clinic is located in Longmont, Colorado. And that address is goodlifelongmont.com. And her other business, I'm going to have her talk about, and I've benefited from her products, and I use them in my practice. That website is goodlifebotanicals.com. So Stacey, I'm going to turn it over to you. I want you to introduce yourself a little more and tell us more about your businesses and what you do there.
Sure. So as Maria said, I'm located in Longmont, Colorado. I opened my acupuncture clinic in 2013. I've been practicing since October of 2011. So just coming up on almost 12 years of practicing. And I specialize in women's health and pediatrics. So early in my career, I specialized in fertility, and I had just had my babies. And now as I'm getting into menopause and my babies are getting into their teenage years, I'm finding my specialty is shifting to reflect my period of life as well. And then as I said, I also work with kids. And the second business, Good Life Botanicals, I actually started in 2016. I am an herbalist, a Chinese medicine herbalist, and I've always made herbs and products for my patients. And my primary patient is my father. And it was right as cannabis was becoming legal in Colorado, and I was able to access locally grown hemp. And he asked me if this liniment oil that I made could last longer. He was having to apply it every half hour to 45 minutes, and being a rancher and a farmer, that was just a little inconvenient. And I had been experimenting with my patients had actually been experimenting with taking CBD oil. And I had noticed a common after effect if they took the Chinese herbs and CBD. It was almost as if they were overdosing on the Chinese herbs. And so that led me to research cannabis and hemp and the cannabinoids and the cannabis plant, and realized that traditionally cannabis was used to potentiate the action of formulas. And that led to my formulation of my Good Life Relief Oil, which was the same formula my dad had been using, only I added about 300 milligrams of full spectrum hemp oil. And it did exactly what he asked. It makes it act faster and act longer. And so that's the key differentiation between my CBD products and all the other CBD products on the market, is that my products work whether there's CBD in them or not. It's just that they work faster and last longer because the CBD is in them. And so I've been doing that since 2017. So yeah, those are my two businesses. And yeah, as you can see from even my introduction of my businesses, my two side coming out, like my dad asking for help and me trying to figure out how to make it better for him.
Yeah, awesome. Okay. So I want to ask first, how did you get into the Enneagram?
So I was introduced to the Enneagram when I was 14.
Wow.
I try to make this short. I grew up in Wyoming. The minister of I was participated in a Methodist church. The minister of that Methodist church was one of the first women ordained in the Methodist faith. Her name is Maggie Can. And during the year, she was this minister for this small farming ranching community. But during the summer, she had created an ecumenical retreat center in the wilds of Du Bois, Wyoming, and would bring in various theologians from around the country and actually around the world. And it's like a dude ranch experience, but at night you had all these preachers and their kids, and they would have theology classes, and then we would do stuff with the kids. And she passed away in 1986. My first summer working up there was 1990. And she had this program where she took high school kids, junior high kids, and they were junior staff. They were treated as full members of staff, and you stayed up there all summer long. And I was a wrangler.
Hmm.
And that summer I turned 14, which would have been, I think, probably 91. One of our seminar leaders did a session on the Enneagram.
Huh.
And so he typed all of us. And it was a little bit like risky because I was 14 and I was still developing my personality. And he said as much. Like, normally he didn't type teenagers, but you know, why not? And we've talked about this, Maria. I came out as a very solid 2. And at 14, I was like, oh, hell no. I am not going to be a 2. I am not a helper. I am not the caretaker. That is not me. And and I was reading all the books, and the type I really liked and really wanted to be was the 5. And so I was like, I really want to be the 5. And he was like, well, you know, that might happen because I'm still developing my personality. But the way you answered all these questions and just watching you, because he'd been my guest and I've been taking him on rides and stuff. He's like, I really think that you are a 2. He's like, and I think you have a really strong 3 wing, but I think you're at your heart a 2. Oh. And I did not want to be, as a teenager, obviously, I did not want to be that, what at the time was being taught is like the stereotypical woman who took care of everybody and was the caretaker. I visioned myself as this strong, independent, you know, I take care of only myself. And I did not want to own up to the fact that I had all these caretaking parts of my personality, right?
Yeah.
I took the test at various times since then. And no matter how I answer the questions, and no matter who I am with, it has always come up that I am a 2 with a very strong 3 wing.
Yeah.
And really probably only in the last 3 years with my own personal therapy and my own personal journey have I really embraced the fact that that is the foundation of where I come from. Yeah. And it's only when I really embraced it that I've also been able to really look at the shadow side of the 2 and really understand how, as many as we've talked about, every number on the Enneagram has really amazing qualities. And then they also have really challenging challenges that are part of their makeup. And it was really only when I kind of embraced that 2, that caretaking part of my personality, that I was then to really able to fully own up to how my shadow came out in that caretaking ability. And that's really only then when things started shifting. And, you know, I know a little bit about astrology. My astrology friends tell me that the last 4 years of my life I've been, I always mess this up, the Uranus return or the Uranus, like there's something with Uranus that comes up in your mid 40s that kind of like makes you realize and evaluate and come to terms with who you are. And that has definitely been happening. Wow. And stepping into that, all of the awesomeness of that 2, and also all of the challenges of that 2. So that's where I'm at right now.
Nice, nice. I love that you're bringing the high and the low side of type and holding them both, because that's the key. It's the good, the bad. Not that there's good and bad in it, but the fullness of what type brings, and that's mind blowing that you came on this at 14. And I'd love for you, if you're comfortable with even, you know, like shifting into what that means as a strong 3 wing too, because I've not had any 3s, which is interesting, like the performer, right? I've not had any 3s volunteer to do this. So so whatever insight you can lend into the 3 wing is helpful too. I wanted to ask how if there's an Enneagram piece to how a wrangler becomes an acupuncturist.
Yeah. So what happened a lot up at the ranch? Well, for one, I was really good with matching riders to the correct horse.
Wow.
So there's this, like, they're a whole separate being, right? And they have their own personalities.
Yeah.
And up at the ranch, it's a very profound healing place. So it's not just this fun kickback dude ranch place. It's actually built on one of the largest sites of petroglyphs in the lower 48.
Wow.
And its history is that it's where the sheep eaters, which are an ancestral part of the Shoshone Indians, they lived there. And it's a very, I mean, you can just feel it when you're in the valley. It's a very sacred place. And it's extreme Wyoming. It's especially back when I was working up there. It was very hard to get to. It took at least 2 hours by car, and you had to have a 4-wheel drive to get to this ranch. So, and it was very rustic. So once you were there, the whole purpose of the ranch was exposing you to faith and faith in the wilderness. And like the whole metaphor about the wilderness, being lost in the wilderness, confronting your fears, confronting your shadow, and having faith in a greater unknown to be able to guide you through all of that. And as a 14-year-old, being responsible for adults, often 2 to 3 times my age, in the middle of the wilderness, taking them on anywhere from 2-hour horseback rides to all-day rides.
Wow.
Not only were they being asked to put their faith in their horse to be able, the terrain is very extreme. It's in a bottom of a glacial moraine valley. So anywhere we go, you're climbing at least 2,000 feet on the back of a horse.
Wow.
So as an adult, having to trust this animal that they can navigate these rocks and these trails without you micromanaging it. And then B, having to trust me. Oftentimes I was the same age as their kids or their grandkids, and then I knew what I was doing to lead you on to these rides, right? So a lot of what I was doing was facilitating, already at 14, adults having kind of like a hard night of the soul or a hard night of whatever was happening on that vacation, and then guiding them through all of that.
Yeah.
So, and that's pretty much what I do as an acupuncturist, only now I actually have the agency and the maturity to actually officially be doing that, right?
Yeah.
So it's a lot of problem solving and a lot of facilitating growth and aid and help and support, just whether or not it's on the back of the horse in the middle of the wilderness, or if it's on my table helping you with overcome whatever health challenges you want to come. It's actually and what I've realized that that's always been kind of like my guiding part of my personality is that I have always felt from a very young age that I was a guide. And part of it was me doing my own internal work so I could figure out what made me tick. And then part of my mission or whatever was to help other people find their own light and help that be as bright as possible. So whether I'm doing that on the back of a horse, walking you through, trusting a horse coming down a super steep ravine and having faith that you can come out the other side, or whether it's on my table, having you work through trauma or an illness that's happening to you now that's preventing from that. It's the same North Star that I'm following. It's just the environment in which I'm following it.
Yeah.
And I think that 3 part comes in with my executive functioning and my leading and my taking charge. And I'm not the type of 2 that sits in the background and is like the stereotypical woman behind the scenes or mother behind the scenes that's guiding and nurturing that way. I tend to be the coach and the leader that's out in front actively figuring out how to get there and then saying, come on, let's go. And I don't know, you're the one that's the 3 expert, but that's from my understanding, that's what makes me such a strong 3, is that I'm willing to step up and be seen rather than staying behind in the background and then doing all the stuff in the background.
Yeah. I definitely can appreciate 3 as wanting to be seen because they're comfortable being on stage. They're comfortable, being seen. They're comfortable performing, stepping in. They're the ones that'll ad lib. If you just say, hey, we lost our speaker, can you jump in and do something? They're the first ones to do that. What I think I'm hearing is also your line to the 8. I'm hearing so much, and this is what I hope to do with these interviews, is to bring the movement in the Enneagram, because everybody tends to, it's a label, it's I'm a 2, I'm a 4, whatever. And I have to pause the video because my dog is having a nervous breakdown. So I will be right back. Okay, we are back now, and my little dog Nala hopefully will not poke her head out, but she may. So all right, so we were talking about the 3 wing and hearing the line to the 8 and this idea of we're not just one thing in the Enneagram. We have these places we can move to, or if we know our Enneagram, we can consciously move to them. When we don't know our Enneagram, we may move to the higher or lower expression of things, and that's where we start to repeat patterns that we don't want to be repeating. So I'm hearing the 8, and I want you to speak to that. But I'm also hearing, and I know we've talked about the invisible line between the 2 and the 5. So for those of you that are not familiar with the Enneagram, with that invisible line of the Enneagram, if you look at the 2 to the 5, you can draw a line between that 2 and the 5. So there is, I would call it energetic access to the type that you always wanted to be. So tell us about that. You talked about being strong, independent, problem-solving abilities that served you as both a wrangler and as an acupuncturist. So how do you feel about your 8 and your invisible 5 line?
Well, you're gonna laugh because this is where you're gonna educate me some. Because the reason I wanted to be a 5 was because, from what I remember, 5s liked to read. They were very introspective, and they are kind of like the researchers. They're like the detectives.
Mm-hmm.
And part of what I love, I've always loved mysteries. And I always thought of myself, like when I was both as a wrangler and even now as an acupuncturist, part of what I am as a detective is figuring out who you are, how all of your pieces fit together, how they work, how they're stuck, and possible ways that can facilitate growth and getting those stuck pieces to start moving again. And as a wrangler, that's what I did with the horses. That's how I said I matched you with a horse, right? Because if you're a highly anxious, fearful, really needs to be in control, worried type person, I'm not going to put you with a horse that's going to accentuate that, right? Like that's not going to be good for you, the horse, or anybody else around you. Right. Instead, I'm going to put you with a horse that's very grounded and very calm and very confident, and kind of let you spaz out on their back without taking it personally. Like they're going to kind of take care of you, which in the horse world is a really unusual thing, because since we're the predator and they're the prey, they usually expect us humans to take care of them. So it's a very particular kind of horse that I'm going to match you with, that will then, through their confidence, give you confidence in order to be able to work through the stuff that we're going to work through, right? Whereas if you're really confident, go-getting, think you can do everything, you don't really listen to me a whole lot on the back of a horse, and you kind of really want to live that cowboy experience, I'm going to put you on a horse that's responsive, but maybe a little slow and maybe a little cautious. Because we're going to balance out your risk-taking and inability to listen with a horse that's going to make you have to listen.
Yeah.
And with a horse that's going to make you have to slow down and assess, because otherwise you're going to get yourself into trouble with, but they're still going to be responsive. They're just going to make you work for it,
Right.
because then you're not going to be impulsive. And, so it's like matching those. Whereas if you're a calm, confident, capable person and rider who is listening and aware of the environment, you're going to get put on a horse that's very responsive, that might need a little caretaking, and will get you to where you're going. But I can trust that you're not going to get into an impulsive situation because of your decisions. And if the horse like freaks out about something, you're going to be able to calm them down, because you're not going to react to them jumping at a fly or something.
Right.
So that's kind of like how I view that, how I did that 5 thing. And that's what I do in the clinic. I mean, that, that's what we do in the clinic, is we're researching and figuring out what that person needs. And then you're experimenting, right? Because sometimes what I think that person needs is absolutely not what that person needs. And so then you have to take that information and adjust and take a look at a different angle. And that's what I always thought, that's why I was so wanting to be the 5, was because I just wanted to be the person that solved the problems. I didn't necessarily want to be the person that was helping or like caretaking, mothering, nurturing, all of that. I just wanted to solve the puzzle.
Yeah. So I guess this is the episode where I get to disclose that I lead with 5, because I haven't shared that yet. So I can say as a 5, and I think we've talked about this in the past. I joke because the 5 energy, and we'll talk about this in an upcoming episode for people watching. I haven't done the head types yet, but the 5 is all about sharing like we show our love by sharing what we know. Because if you have knowledge, you have power, and then you'll be safe, because knowledge, 5s believe that knowledge keeps us all safe, which is not true, but that's what we believe. So, so when you have access to that line, to the 5, that invisible line between the 2 and the 5, I think you have some energetic understanding of information that I love you enough that I'm going to look for all that information that is specific to you, and I'm going to give to, being the giver, I'm going to give you that information because I love you. It's how I show my love, through that 5 energy. And again, this is that movement in the Enneagram that we have choices in the Enneagram, right? So just because you lead with 2 doesn't mean you only live in the 2 box, right? So I think that's one of the ways, and we've not really talked too deeply into the 2 yet, but I think that's one of the ways that you express your concern for people. So it's still a giving, right? And the thing is also the motivation behind the giving. So I guess one good question is, what other ways do you give that don't involve research and information?
Well, one of the ways that I've been working on is that I am incredibly responsible.
Okay. What does responsible mean for you?
So if I say I'm going to do it, I do it. And if it needs to be done, I'm going to do it. Whether it's my job or not, I'm going to do it. If I see that you're having a hard time doing it, I will often step in and do it for you, so that you don't have to struggle. And it also gets done for me. It's not just, like oftentimes it's altruistic, but oftentimes it's also, your struggling is preventing me from doing what I need to do. And so I'm going to step in and do 2 things with one, right? I'm going to help you. And I'm also going to be able to get done when I need to get done, because I'm helping you and I don't have to wait and watch you struggle. And then it's just, really, it's looking to see what challenges are coming up, and then how can I alleviate those challenges for everybody. Like, it's taken me a lot to understand that when I was younger, I really believed that if you had no struggle, then everything was good.
Mm.
Even though I knew that struggle was how you learned, it was also like having that pain, like eliminating that pain, whatever that pain was the ultimate end goal. It's taken me almost 47 years on the planet for me to realize that just because I can alleviate somebody's pain does not mean that I should.
Mm. Mhm. Tell me more about
And
that.
well, it's oftentimes I'm removing their lessons
Mm.
and their agency.
Mm.
And then they often feel it as being incredibly manipulative, which is not at all how I was interpreting it. It comes across as being very controlling, and very manipulative. And sometimes it comes across as being deceptive. And there's a lot of dark stuff that can come up with that, which is not at all actually how I intended. I'm just trying to make everybody else's life easier.
Right.
And the other part of that is that I don't express my needs. Like I don't say, hey, I need you to figure this out because I need you to do this so that I can do what I need to do. I don't ever tell you what my needs are. I just look at it and be like, okay, I need this and you're struggling with it. And I need you to figure that out so I can get what I need. So I'll just step in and do it for you so that I can get to what I need. It's taken me a really long time to understand that I need to express my needs, that I need to tell somebody, hey, this isn't working, or I need this. And then I need you to do this to get what I need. Are you able to do that? And then have the conversation. If they're not, do you want my help? Can I help you? Or maybe you just really can't do it. You're not going to do it. And I need to figure out how to get my need met some other way that's not through you.
Right. And again, I keep going back to the movement and the breath and what you're talking about. And I think this speaks to, well, first of all, doing a lot of work since the age of 14 around your type, which isn't the case with most people. I definitely hear the two in not being able to express your needs, and having the wisdom now to know that the conversation beforehand can change everything. I still, and again, it speaks to the balance in the type. I still hear a lot of the 8. So when I'm not looking at the camera, I'm jotting things down. And I'm going to do it. I'll step in for you so you don't struggle. Those are very 8 types of statements. So the interesting thing, so I have a different theory about the stress and security type with the Enneagram. I don't think, especially once we know the Enneagram, I don't think that we have to go to the low side of our stress type. I think I know I personally have worked with that. So the higher the low of the 8, you spoke to some of the high sides of that 8 line, being strong, being independent, being the one to do it, being the one to step in. So someone who doesn't have the capacity doesn't struggle, because that comes from the concern and the 8's tendency to kind of pull the, so to speak, underdog along to help them. So tell me what your lower side of that line looks like as a 2 when you go to the low 8.
That's when the control comes in, and where it's not only are you not able to do it, but whatever situation we are in is so chaotic that I can't even, I'm not even going to help you try to figure out how to do it. I am just going to push you to the side, and I am going to step in, and I am taking control. And do not question me. Do not argue with me. Do not challenge me. We are doing this. We are doing this my way, and we are doing this my way now.
So tell me, when you were a wrangler, give me a story.
Um, so one of those is, it's actually kind of funny. One of my favorites, because this often happened. Because I was a young teenage girl taking these adults out on rides, and it was almost always men. And we'd be out like 2 or 3, sometimes we'd be on an all-day ride, so about 4.5 hours from the ranch. And we're in the wilderness. We're in the heart of the Fitzpatrick Wilderness. So if weather is moving in, you have to get back to the ranch. There's no place, and if anybody knows the Wind Rivers in Wyoming and the Rockies there, it is not a heavy populated forested. There's no cover. Like, they are very exposed mountains.
Yeah.
And so if weather is moving in, you have to get back to the ranch. You have to get back to shelter, both for your safety and for the safety of the horses. And because I grew up there and just being aware and being taught by my dad, and watching the horses, I could often tell when weather was coming about 2 hours before. And you can see for hundreds of miles up there. You can see weather coming.
Yeah, yeah.
And so all of my stories, when I get into that mode, is we're like, at lunch, we're about 4 hours in on an 8-hour all day ride. It's lovely. The sun is out. The temperature is beautiful. There's a light breeze, which in Wyoming is rare. And all of a sudden the horses start shaking a little bit. Their ears start twitching. And I can feel that the barometric pressure is starting to shift.
Yeah.
And if you were to look around, like, the dark cloud is literally 200 miles away. It's like over Jackson Hole and like the Tetons. Like, it's a faint line on the horizon. And I'm like, we have to get home. And so I start getting the adults, and like, had to check cinches and get people loaded up. And always it was some guy. Well, I don't know why we have to leave. This is lovely. Why can't we stay here a little bit longer? Please don't. And it usually starts off with very kind. Please don't argue with me. This needs to happen. People disgruntled. And then finally it's like, sir, we have to go. Like, I am the one that's responsible. This is what needs to happen. You need to get on your horse and go. You are going to endanger all of us because you want to spend 20 more minutes with the wildflowers. Like, get on your horse. Let's go. And inevitably their wife would look at them and say, honey, maybe we should listen to her. She did grow up here, didn't she? And the guy would be like, she's an idiot. Like, she's young. She doesn't know what's going on. She's just ruining my vacation up here in the mountains. And we would usually, because the argument would go on for a while, we would be about an hour and a half from home when it hits. Yeah. And it hits how it does up there. It literally in like 20 minutes goes from lovely and wonderful to like hell on earth, when the wind and the lightning and the clouds open up and the hail, and you're on top of an exposed ridge where like there's no place for you to go. And there are so many stories where I've stopped long enough to get everybody in their slickers and to get things battened down. And then I'm just telling everybody, trust your horse. Because in this situation, you really have to trust your horse. And then we're taking a trail that is literally the bail-off trail. It is not a trail anybody ever uses unless you are in a true emergency. And you get to the bottom, and and sometimes we would ride in amid all this natural chaos. Sometimes what would happen is it would blow in, and it would be 45 minutes of sheer terror. And then it blows right back out. The sun comes up, and there's a rainbow.
Rainbow.
And the guy is looking at me like I'm some kind of, ESP, or I have psychic, power. And it's like, if you know how to read the weather and you know how to read the horses, it's not rocket science. But in between then, I've become very much a drill sergeant at 14, telling you to get on the horse and start arguing with me, because your life is going to be in danger if you don't. And so that would be one of those instances where that would kick in.
Okay. So what about when someone doesn't listen or doesn't listen completely or questions your authority, which is coming from a place of caring for you as a two? What's it like when people don't acknowledge or don't appreciate what you bring?
I tend to get very quiet and withdraw and sulk.
Okay. Does it
um,
end there?
um, then what will often come out is the passive aggressive nastiness. Like, because I'm still going to show up. I'm still going to do what I need to do. But then when you fall on your face, I'm going to be like, yeah, I told you so.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's not going to be, unless you can own that you didn't listen to me, there's not going to be a whole lot of compassion that you're in a shit ton of trouble.
Okay. Okay.
I'm not, I've gotten better at that. Having kids makes you a lot better at that. And in my really younger days, I would do a lot of behind the scene politicking in like corporate jobs where I was creating defiance against you. Like I had a couple of bosses. I was in tech before I was an acupuncturist. And I had a couple of bosses that were just wow. And they were totally incompetent and total egomaniacs. And I felt it was my duty to protect the company. And after being dismissed and put down and condescended and them doing stuff that was not good, I was just like, fine. And I had somebody tell me that was my Leo coming out in me too. I don't know, but what I would literally just go behind the scenes, start rallying people, and then basically create a passive wall where everybody was doing what needed to be done, but not what the boss wanted them to do, and eventually would make it so impossible that the higher ups would get rid of the boss.
Wow.
Yeah. That's what happens when you grow up in a small town in Wyoming. You learn how to work politics really, really well.
So is there a give to get energy to any of?
There is in my, I would say definitely in my immediate intimate relationships. Like it's one of the things that I have learned and that I'm working on that I truly believed I had to give and support and help in order to get any love back in return. That I am not lovable on my own just for who I am. I am only loved for what I can do for you.
And then what when that giving isn't reciprocated?
I get very angry, very defensive, very bitter. Yeah, it's not good.
Yeah, you're hurt.
Yeah.
Of all the types, I think we don't appreciate how hurt twos can be, because they're always there. They'll always do the things, right? And over time, they can tend to feel unseen, which with your three wing is interesting, right? Because you have that energy that wants to be seen, and twos are taken for granted a lot. So so how is it for you to? So part of it is voicing your needs, but how do you handle voicing your hurts?
In the past, I have tended to bottle them up and catalog them. And then when I finally hit the tipping point, it's not just the thing that in that moment, I have a laundry list of 100 things over the past month, 3 months, 6 months, years that I have kept and stored and like, just like, like somebody said, it's almost like you're just waiting for me to mess up so that you can list all the ways I've failed. And then it's like you're not just accounting for the one thing that tipped me over. you have to account for all the times that
Mhm.
you dissed me or dismissed me
Mhm.
or hurt me.
Right.
I have gotten, I had to own that and realize that all those times that there's a boundary crossing or I'm hurt or that my needs aren't met, it's my responsibility to name that and call that.
Mm.
I think I honestly thought people just knew.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
part of what I would get really pissed off at is that I even had to tell you. Like, I
Mhm.
know what your needs are. Why can't you just know what my needs are? Like, it was
Mhm. Right.
really, this sounds kind of
Right.
cliche, but it was really eye-opening for me to realize, holy shit, not everybody knows what everybody else's needs are.
Yep. Yep.
And if I don't say, hey, what how you just spoke to me hurt my feelings,
Mhm.
that I'm actually telling you it's okay for you to speak to me that way.
Mhm. Mhm. Right.
Like, I can tell in an instant when I've said something that you don't like. Why can't you tell that with me?
Mhm.
Like,
Mhm.
why? And then how unfair it was for me to keep this list of all the times that you've transgressed and
Yeah.
I've never named it. And then when I finally have enough to blow up and list all of them, like how
Mhm.
really, truly cruel and mean and unfair that was. Um, that was really eye-opening. That was like, what was funny for me was that it's not like in the moment that I'm keeping track. It's not like
Mhm.
I'm like, oh, there's Maria's first transgression. How many more? That's not how it works.
Right. Right.
Just, it's like there's a part of my brain that when the hurt happens automatically reaches back and remembers all the hurts before.
Yeah.
But that one that triggers the memories, if that didn't happen, I wouldn't have remembered all the other ones before.
Right. Right. Right.
So it's not like I'm walking around nursing all of these hurts with everybody that I'm
Mhm.
interacting with. When they happen, I legitimately bypass them myself
Mhm.
and just go on my way.
Right.
But that's how, like, I love that book, The Body Always like remembers, or
Keep score.
yeah, keep
Yeah.
score,
Mhm.
because it's literally like once the whatever it is, and I don't know any, like, now I've gotten much better at my cues, but I would never know which hurt it was going to be that triggered me
Right.
flipping over the other side.
Mhm.
But my body remembered all of
Yeah.
them. So it was
Yep.
like once it triggered and I
Mm.
flipped, all the other times that that happened
Yeah.
also all came back in real time, real, 3D color, all of it. So
Mhm.
it
Yeah.
was like, so it's taken me a while to realize that I need to really be in my body and recognize when those little dings come in and then name them in the moment, because it's
Yeah.
much more respectful to both of us.
Exactly. Yep.
And
Yep.
it gives the other person the opportunity to be like, oh, okay, like this is how Stacey wants to be treated. Can I do that? Can I not? I mean, I think about so many friendships in my past that I would have sidestepped spectacular blow ups if I had just named stuff earlier, because we wouldn't have survived the earlier dust ups.
Right. Right. Right.
But I maintained the relationship until it totally, like, one of my ex-girlfriends said, she's like, you let all this stuff slide to the point where when you finally blow up, all you can do is blow the whole damn bridge up and we're done. Like,
Mhm.
there's no chance of repair.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. Yeah. Yeah, seeing a two's, and we've talked about this, seeing a two's anger is one of the most spectacular, shocking experiences, I think, more than seeing the eight, because you go to the eight, right? And that's where the blow up happens. But it's so unexpected for the two, who's always kind, who's always nurturing, who always does the things for us, who shows up with the pie or whatever it is that we need. And as you evidence by being able to match horses with people at a very, very young age and knowing what people need, right? That's the two's gift, is knowing what people, and they just do it. And then to see that kind and loving, nurturing human being just go boom, it's like shock and awe. Like the 8 we expect it from. If we know 8s, we kind of like, we've all seen 8s blow up. We kind of know they do, but 2s, it's like, whoa, what just happened? And a lot of times it is, not repairable. But it speaks to, if you see a 2 blow up, you've got to appreciate how much they are hurting and have been hurting for a long time. Yeah. I don't want to avoid your line to the 4.
Well, and that's the one that I need your help with. I think that's the one for me. I don't understand that one.
Okay.
And it's funny because I know, for like in my mind, the 4 is the artist, right?
Yeah.
And I always think of them as like the rebel. Like they don't care. They're just doing their thing. They're very creative. And one of my dear friends growing up, it was a 4, and she was the most original woman I have ever been around. She's one of my role models. She was one of my head wranglers, and she just did things her way all the time and was wildly creative in everything she did. And I could just never fathom not caring about what others thought so absolutely that I would just do whatever I wanted and let everybody, she would just, and everybody else would accommodate her because she was this wildly creative, amazing, imaginative woman. And one of my orientations is that I know what everybody around me is thinking, or at least I think I do, all the time. And I'm constantly trying to either match that or fix that or calm that. Gotten better as I've gotten older. But that was the part about the 2 that I was just like, at least in my understanding of it all, I was like, how do you not have, how, because I could never imagine being that free and also caring about what others thought all the time.
Okay. So would it change how you thought about the 4 if I use the word individualist?
That's still to me the same thing. Like somebody who's a pure individual really doesn't care what others think of them.
Okay. So I don't know that 4s don't really care what people think of them. There's more of a drive to be unique. And it's not out of, I don't care if you think I'm unique, I am unique. I wish you understood me as unique, because what the 4 really wants is relationship. They want connection. They live for that, and if the thing that will make them feel like they're dying is if you take away a relationship. They suffer, they struggle with that because they want that connection. But they see this beauty in everything. They can see beauty in the most horrific things. And that's what makes them unique, their unique views of pain and suffering. So, I mean, yes, they can be artists. Yes, it's one of the names we put on them. But I don't think it's the only thing. Yeah, I don't think.
Well, and now that you describe it that way, that is a very clear part of my personality. I can see the good and the beautiful in everything.
Yeah. I'd imagine growing up on the ranch, you would have to see, well, not have to, but it would be easier if you have that inclination to see life that way. And I think the nature of your business, I think you're an individualist, but one of my other questions, and I have, just so people know, I have like a whole list of questions. I don't think I've hit one of them yet. So, but as someone who has that line to the individualist, someone who has the line to the 4 in power and security, right? How did you go from life on the ranch to life in the tech world to, I believe you did your acupuncture degree in New York? I always wondered, I always wanted to ask you that question. How do you go from living on a ranch in Wyoming to living in Manhattan? Because that's got to have an individualist piece to it.
Well, it's funny because if you were to ask my parents, they would like, my dad is always like, you've always done what you've wanted and you've never cared about what others think, which I always look at him and I'm like, what are you talking about? I have always had this drive to explore and to leave. I love Wyoming and I love where I'm from and I love the land and the beauty of where I come from and the wildness of it all. I never saw myself staying put ever as a kid.
That's foreign.
For the longest time, I was trying to get to Australia.
Wow.
And then when I met my husband, we met at the University of Wyoming, and he's from the East Coast. And so when we started dating, he got a job in Connecticut, and I had always wanted to go to San Francisco, but I thought, well, the East Coast is just as different as San Francisco, so why not? So I followed him to Connecticut, and I worked for a private school in Connecticut, and it was right in 1999, 2000, right as the .com boom was starting. And he was a graphic designer then, and he asked me to become a programmer. So I went to programming boot camp, and one of his friends became the first CTO of WeightWatchers.com.
Wow.
And Jason and I partied together all the time. And so he hired me straight out of this 6-week Java boot camp to be the first tech employee for WeightWatchers.com.
Huh.
And so that's how I got to Manhattan. And that's how I got into the .com world. And I think I was employee number 5. Because they had the CTO, CEO, they had a marketing person, they had the artistic director, the art director, and then I was the 5th one. I was like employee number 5.
Wow.
And I just remember thinking, like, this is history. Like, history's being made, and I'm on the East Coast. I don't want to be 90 when my kids ask me, Mom, Grandma, what did you do during the .com boom? I didn't want to be like, I was a school teacher. I didn't have anything to do with it. So I was like, let's go see what this is all about.
Huh.
And so that's how I became a programmer. And that's how I got into the tech world. And then how I got into holistic medicine was that I had chronic sinus infections. And my doctor at the time, like, I was to the point where I was just living off of antibiotics. As soon as I would finish one round, I would have maybe 2 weeks before I'd have to start another round again.
Yeah.
And he was like, you're 23 years old. This isn't normal. He's like, we know surgery. We know that route. He's like, there's this woman who's a naturopath. My wife works a lot with her. Why don't you go see what she's about?
Wow.
And the naturopath had actually graduated from Bastyr. So she had a lot of Chinese medicine in her background. So she basically put me on Chinese herbs for like 3 years and lots of supplements. And my sinus infections and even my allergies disappeared.
Wow.
I joke that I was on the paleo diet before it was cool. And and that's what led me into acupuncture, because she had told me to become an acupuncturist. I had told her that everybody knew acupuncture was placebo and pseudoscience, and I hated needles. So no, thank you. I want to do what you do. I want to go to naturopathic school. And she was like, well, I'm going to be blunt. With your personality, you're going to make a horrible naturopath. And of course I was offended. And I was like, why? And she was like, because naturopathic doctors require a high level of compliance in order for their medicine to work. 90% of your patients will not be compliant enough for you, and it will drive you crazy. Acupuncture works whether you believe in it or not.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, thank you, but no, thank you. And I left Weight Watchers. I burnt out. actually, and I moved back to Wyoming, and I was training horses when one of the horses I was training got acupuncture.
Oh, wow.
And his reaction to both pre, during, and post treatment was so profound and so obvious that I was like, okay, well, I was wrong about it being a placebo because that doesn't happen in animals.
Right.
And it made me curious. And then the next week, I was actually in a horse accident and broke my left knee and used acupuncture to avoid surgery.
Wow. Wow.
And so then that's how I ended up back in New York, going to acupuncture school. Because you'll laugh at this. I actually went to PCOM in San Diego. And after 6 years in Manhattan, I couldn't handle the Californians. I was just like, you have got to be kidding me. Like, not happening. And so we went to New York for a wedding. One of my friends at Weight Watchers was getting married. And my husband was like, there's a PCOM New York campus, and they're having an open house this weekend.
Wow. Wow.
And so he basically dragged me, because at that point in time, I was like, no, I'm not doing this thing because I can't be a flaky Californian. And no offense to the Californians. This was, 28-year-old me talking. And I went to the PCOM New York open house, and I was like, I'm home. This is exactly where I belong.
Wow.
And so we moved back to New York, and that's how come I graduated. And then we had my son, and then we moved to Colorado, and I eventually graduated from Colorado, but I did the bulk of my education at PCOM New York.
PCOM New York. Did you feel like a renegade doing that?
No, it felt like I had to do that if I was going to survive. And I guess that's why I've always argued with my parents, because I always thought of individuals as being that individualistic nature, as being, I want to do this, so I'm going to go do this. The reason for me doing all of this, I never, I didn't even know acupuncture existed. But I knew enough to know that I was going to be the primary breadwinner in my family. And I knew enough to know that me being in tech, I was losing a chunk of my soul every day I was in the tech world. And I knew I needed to help people. And it's funny because by the time I left, I was a technical project manager, and my engineers, everybody in the company called me the witch doctor, because I was giving herbs out to everybody. Like I had totally learned from my naturopath and was totally doctoring everybody on herbs and supplements to keep them healthy. And I kept trying to convince myself that I was helping a lot of people by working for Weight Watchers, because it's a diet company. And I was the journal girl. I was the one who coded all of the journal and did all of that. So I would try to convince myself that I was helping a lot of people because the product I was coding and I was working for helped people. But I couldn't see it, and I couldn't feel it.
Yeah.
And my day-to-day was this tech world drama. And it was like, ugh. And then it was classic. I mean, most of my engineers made like 3 times more money than I did. And it was just all the stuff that happens in the tech world if you're a woman. And I was young, and it was bad. And so I was on this quest. I was in therapy. I was doing all this stuff. I was trying to figure out, and I was like, okay, I want kids. I want a family. I have to be I have to do something that I feel like I'm changing somebody's life every day. And then when I had that experience with the acupuncture, I was like, well, I have to figure out how this works. Like because she stuck 3 needles in my right elbow for my left knee, and it moved. And I was like, how does that work? My engineering brain was like, how does that work?
Right.
And so I went to acupuncture school, not because I wanted to be an acupuncturist, but because I wanted to figure out how it all worked.
Yeah. Yeah. That's that 5 line.
And then once I was in acupuncture school, I was like, holy crap, this is how my brain works. Because I see patterns. And so going to acupuncture school was incredibly easy for me, actually. And it was almost like second nature. And all of the farming and water metaphors I knew what all of that meant growing up where I did with water and how we irrigate in Wyoming. And so it was like all these puzzle pieces coming together.
Yeah.
And then I realized I could do this and I could help a lot of people. I would walk home every day, and no matter how hard the day was in clinic, I would know that I had helped at least one person. And the other part of that was that a lot of my friends went to medical school, and when they found out I was going to acupuncture school, they were like, why don't you go to a real medical school?
Oh.
And the thing was that there was something missing from Western science. Like the whole entire time I was having those sinus infections, I'd be asking my doctor, why do I keep getting these sinus infections?
Right.
And their answer was, I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Chinese medicine had that answer.
Right. Right.
And I was like, this medicine makes sense. Like I can now look at the person who walks in, and with a combination of their physical, mental, and emotional history, figure out why this constellation of a human is working the way it is. It's not one thing. It's the whole system. Right. That makes sense to me.
Yeah.
I can do that.
Yeah.
And so that's how I became an acupuncturist. It was because I could do something every day that changed somebody's life. And it satisfied that part of my brain that needed to solve a problem and solve a puzzle. And it felt complete. It didn't feel like I was just fixing one thing. It felt like I was working with the whole system, and that made sense to me. And so when people look at me, it's funny because somebody's like, you are literally the rebel of all rebels because we're acupuncturists.
Yeah.
That's not why I did this.
Right.
It was because it fit all these other things, and it just happened to be that job fit all these other checks.
Right.
And that's why I did it.
Yeah. Yeah. But if I heard you right, knowing that you helped people at the end of the day was a motivating factor. Yeah. So if that piece wasn't in there, would it be as complete for you?
I wouldn't do it.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. That's the two. Yeah.
Yeah. I had to feel like I was changing somebody's life every day.
Yeah.
And that I could actually see it, hear it, feel it. Like
yeah.
I had to know without a shadow of a doubt that somebody's life had changed for the better that day because I was doing it.
Have you ever had, because I know I have this experience sometimes and it makes me a little crazy as a 5, but what about when you know you've affected a change in somebody? Because you can either what they're feeding back to you, or you can feel it in the pulses or see it in the tongue. You know, you changed something and they say they didn't get any better. What does that do?
It depends on how it comes across.
Okay.
So if they're accusing me of not doing my job because they don't feel any better, I've learned how to let that go. Okay. And I used to get really pissed. And I used to get really defensive. Now I know that there's a part of them that's not yet ready to acknowledge what the shift is. And that's not my responsibility.
Wow, beautiful. That's huge.
If they're not accused, and I guess that's the same thing if they're not accusing me, is that, and I know this for myself, I guess because I've experienced this myself, right? Like I've been with practitioners and I've been with people where my body had shifted, but my need to believe the story I hadn't yet come to a place where I could change my story.
Right.
And oftentimes the body needs to change for a while before you can feel safe enough to change the story.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I've also realized I've really come to a place where I'm not the one affecting the change. Somewhere over the last few years, it's really become, because I realized that if I was the one affecting the change, then the change wouldn't hold if I wasn't there.
Mm-hmm.
And so over the last few years, I've realized like I'm just witnessing the change.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm helping to facilitate it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But that also means that if the other person can't recognize their change, that doesn't mean I didn't do the work.
Right.
That's part of their journey.
Right.
And
Right.
I wish them well and I bless them and let them be on their way. But I am no longer, my days are no longer tied up to how many people's lives I've changed. It's really become more of an act of true service, because I also realized that the more intention I put out there, the more I was still energetically connected to what the result was.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm really just a witness.
Yeah.
Like I sometimes view myself, and other acupuncturists will get probably a little growly with me on this, but I really just kind of sometimes view myself as this needle technician. Like I know where to put the needles,
Mm-hmm.
but what happens with those needles is not of my intention. The only intention I have when I go in to treat my patients is to facilitate 45 minutes of calm.
Mm.
I don't anymore think about like if I have somebody with an irregular cycle, oh, I'm gonna, twist this needle and it's gonna, I don't go there at all anymore.
Mm.
I'm just like, these are the needles. Peace out. Your body is going to do what your body needs to do. And I'm just facilitating the environment, the room, and the experience that allows you to do what you need to do.
What about herbs? How does that come into that picture for you?
Same thing, because just because I give you a formula doesn't mean you're going to take it.
Right.
And I view it again as it's another tool that I'm giving you that if you so choose to use, awesome.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not going to get pissed because you're not taking the herbs.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
If you come into me and you say, hey, I'm still having an irregular period, and I say to you, well, have you been taking the herbs?
Mm-hmm.
And you're like, no. I'm like, like there's only so much that there's a reason I gave them to you.
Right.
And I can't adjust anything else I'm doing until you participate in what I've already given you.
Yeah.
And if you come into me and you say, take these, consistently, daily for the last 3 months and nothing's changed, okay, then we have a conversation. Like I need to change something.
Yeah.
But I really view myself as a teacher and a guide, and I'm just giving you the opportunity to make the changes that you want.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's your journey.
Yeah.
And, and especially with fertility, because damn, I mean, I say this to my fertility patients, if I could guarantee that you were going to be pregnant, I would have a completely different practice and most people couldn't afford me. Like, that's just the reality of this. Like, all I am doing is supporting you to become as healthy as you can. And then the rest of it is up to chance and whatever, like magic, mojo, God, universe thing you want to consider. I have no control over that.
Right. Right.
Nobody does.
Right. Right.
And so when people come in and thank me for getting them pregnant, it's like, all I did was you did it because you showed up.
Yeah.
You showed up, you participated in what I presented to you. And that's what got you pregnant. It wasn't that magic needle I put on the top of your head like the third time you ran here. That's not how this works.
Yeah. Is it still hard to hear that when somebody thanks you? Yeah.
No, I think it's sweet. And I think I get it because, I had my own fertility challenges. And when it finally happens, it feels like, and we humans are superstitious people. We do all sorts of things. to
Mhm.
try to control our environment.
Right.
And it's really humbling when you realize you don't have
Mm.
any,
Yeah.
like, but what you
Yeah.
can affect is just showing up.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And so, what I never want to do is be like the guru who saved me. It's like, nah,
Mm.
like, like you showed up, you did the work. I just put in the needles and gave you 40 minutes a piece, and that's all I did.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm hearing humility is the virtue of the two. And even when you said just being a witness, that your role is to be a witness. For the type that likes to give and do and anticipate what people need, to witness. I know a couple of twos, okay? I think, first of all, it's hard for them to witness, to just witness, to not have an attachment to anything beyond the witnessing, because that instinct to help, to intervene, to intercede, to anticipate everything that needs to be done, it's deep in them, so to
So
be able to just witness.
well, here's what I figured out with myself. That need for me, like, because I recognized a few years ago that my need to help people, I called it a pathology.
Mm, mm,
And I recognized and figured out within me about 4 years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, right when COVID was starting to hit, actually, that that was how I survived the traumas I experienced as a kid.
mm,
That was how I got control.
mm,
That was how I made sense of all of it.
mm,
And that was what saved me, literally.
mm,
And that I had almost this pathological need to save people.
mm,
And I don't know why it shifted. I can't, I can tell you it was in the fall, right before COVID hit. And I had a couple of intense experiences, business experiences that fall. And I had gotten myself into some pretty deep financial trouble following the impulse of that pathological need to help and support others. And I realized I didn't have to.
yeah.
I could let it go.
Mm,
And that the only person who was really holding on to this rope as tight was me.
mm, yeah.
And that what was the worst thing that could happen
Mm,
if I let it go?
mm,
And I didn't know, but it couldn't be anywhere near as bad as what I was going through in that moment in time by holding on so tightly.
mm,
So, okay, let's own your part in this. You totally co-created all this shit with everybody else.
mm,
You don't need to save everybody.
yeah. Yeah.
It's okay. And by the way, your saving is totally fucking everything up. Excuse the language, but it's like you're totally you're not actually saving them.
Yeah.
Like your intentions
Right.
are pure, but what's actually happening is not what you. It's not actually what you wanted.
Right. Right. Right.
And so just literally let it go.
Mm,
And and then I started noticing how many times and how many places and how many relationships I was holding on so tight. And and then what happened when I let go? And I think letting go in the clinic was actually the easiest place to let go.
mm, mhm,
Because I mean, I have really good relationships with my patients, but it was like my scientific rational brain was like, well, if my intention is what's keeping all these people here and it's what's keeping all these people well, and I'm a shitty acupuncturist.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not actually trusting the medicine to do what the medicine says it can do.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, let's just let that was actually incredibly easy for me to let it go in the treatment room.
Yeah. Did you have more energy after that, or?
Oh, yeah. And then it became really easy to see where I was giving too much energy and where people were used to me and were taking too much.
Mm.
And yeah, everything started changing then because I was just like, and it changed with my kids too, because my oldest was about 9 then. And the thing with mothering is there's a time period where you are their end all be all. You have to be like, you have to be that person.
Right.
I liked it, but I didn't love it. I think that individual streak is super strong in me. Like I never wanted people to be super dependent, like consciously super dependent on me. And so I was working with my kids, and I actually have a very free range way of parenting with my kids. And one of my employees was like, you give your kids all kinds of responsibilities, but don't give anybody else any.
Wow.
And I was like, true. Okay. Okay. And it was because like I in my mind, I was raising a human. So it was okay for me to give my kids that responsibility because it was a different goal with my kids than it was with my staff. And, and I was like, you're right. Okay. Let's let this go. And then let's see what happens. And so that was how I got into that place where I am that witness. And it was also really a relief that I didn't have to be responsible for all that.
Yeah.
I think that's a hard part. Sometimes maybe people don't realize with twos is how much responsibility we feel for everything.
Yeah. It's a lot. It's a lot of holding. I'm going to go back to a word you used earlier, the cataloging of experiences and where that gets cataloged, your heart type, right? It gets cataloged in the heart, right? And, you think of that energy and Chinese medicine and the Shen, and we're utilizing this organ and its energy cataloging. And if you take those things off the shelf, how much more energy you have to use that heart differently, right? And as a heart type, I mean, I joke as a 5, we don't have immediate access to the heart types, so actually we don't have hearts, but which isn't true. But you guys are heart. I mean, you live the heart energy for the rest of us in the Enneagram. So we would like you to, I can speak as a 5, I would like the heart types out there to not be cataloging, so they can use the fullness of the spirit of the heart. I do have a question of letting go versus the word you used earlier, which was witness. Is that different for you, or?
I had to learn how to let go before I could witness.
Okay. That makes sense. What does witnessing feel like at its best?
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
I mean, it's that humans are amazing, and it's being able to be in the presence and just watch and witness another soul being person in all of the ways, like, become more. And it's hard because sometimes I think the English language has a real challenge with describing how all of this unfolds. I think our language tends to be too binary, and there's lots of nuance and variation. And the only way I can describe it is either using tapestry or using light, where there's lots of different, like, I often sometimes talk about threads, and everybody has lots of different threads, either threads of like thread or threads of light, and there's all different variations in color. And when we're stuck, it gets grayed, I guess, is the only way. It's like, it's not as bright, or not as, and the reason I'm struggling with those words is because the dark sides of us also get diminished, and then they become more sick because they're diminished. Whereas if you're able to fully embrace all of the color, all of the nuance that you are, I think people are sometimes afraid that means that the darker sides of their personalities have become more powerful. What I have found is that they're actually balanced more. Like, you're more aware of them and you're not scared of them.
Yeah.
So you're able to hold them and balance them and respect them in a way that is beneficial and helpful rather than destructive.
I would say that is a beautiful demonstration of your 4-line. Yeah. And that's in attainment and security and in power. That's what you know.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's pretty individualist, what I was hearing.
And it's just like helping everybody's little light become more, whatever it is,
right.
Whatever that expression needs to be, it's helping them to do that more.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or easier, I guess is the word, maybe not more, but easier. Or yeah. I still sometimes think it's hard with the English language, because oftentimes sometimes people interpret that as like more quantity.
Right.
And I'm not necessarily, it's not like there's a less or more, better or not so good. It's just, that's why I go back to brighter versus diminished. It's
right. Like a resonance almost.
Yeah.
Very cool. I am going to give a quick look at some of my questions. I don't know how much I care about my questions right now. This has been spectacular. So, all right. Okay, here's one. We kind of talked a little bit about it, but what's it like being a mom and an Enneagram 2?
I will tell you that when I was 14, and what I thought an Enneagram 2 and being a mom meant, is not at all how I am a mom. And so I think I had that pretty stereotypical 1950s mom image of sorry, my son's calling, of
You need me to pause? We can.
Give me 1 second, let me pause.
Okay, hang on. Okay.
I think I had that really stereotypical submissive, quiet 1950s mom kind of stereotype in my mind when I first learned about the two and the caretaker and all that. And like I said, how I mother, it's more like when they're young, I was there end all be all. And now it's like I'm growing young adults. And so it's less about stepping in and caretaking and solving all problems and alleviating any hardship. And it's more about coaching and encouraging and teaching them how to move through hardship.
Nice.
And so I would think, and I think that's just because, again, like, I think that's part of me being raised on a farm, knowing that it's funny because I'm thinking about this as we're talking. When I think about adults in my life, especially adults in my life that I've stepped in to problem solve for, or take responsibility for, or alleviate for, it was because I loved them and I thought by eliminating the hardship, it would help them. And then eventually I would get love in return. But my relationship with my children, I don't have, and that's like the classic quid pro quo thing that twos get in trouble with, right?
Right.
I don't have that expectation with my kids. I'm not going to step in so that they will love me. Like, I've never had that expectation with my kids. For me, it's all like, I'm just giving. But I'm also training young humans. And so they need to know how to fail. They need to know how to go through hardship. They need to know how to, and so in some ways, it's funny because my kids sometimes will say I'm harder on them than other parents are because I don't rescue my kids. At least not in like true life important stuff. Like my son forget the saxophone. Yeah, I'll drop the saxophone off because that's not a life or death situation with the saxophone, right?
Right.
But, he decides not to hand in his algebra project because he thinks it's stupid. Okay, not my place. Like, you think you won't fail? Okay, like,
Yeah.
You'll figure it out.
Yep. Okay. So my next question was going to be, what would your kids say about you as a mom? So pretty tough.
I think they would say that I'm very fair,
Okay.
very supportive.
Okay.
And like, I'm not rescuing them unless they actually genuinely unless it's like they really need it.
Right. Okay. We talked about humility, but we didn't talk specifically about the pride of the two, which is the vice.
That's probably going to be a hard one for me to answer.
Yeah, and I'll tell you why, because you have done tremendous work around your type. So yeah, we can push that aside. If it jumps back, just let me know. Something you mentioned to me a while back when we chatted about twos being magnets for narcissists, and also twos can be covert narcissists. Do you want to speak to that at all?
Sure. So part of my deep dive the last few years has been into the dark triad personalities. Partly because I have been accused of being a narcissist in my past. And I was like, well, am I? And so like this is where my 5 comes in. I do a deep dive for years into how all of that works. And
I had mentioned that book to you, Sandra Brown, and her research into empaths and narcissists and the dark triads. And when I finally found her research, that was when I finally was like, aha, like I can because stuff would make sense or I could identify with stuff. But one of the things that really always pissed me off was this whole idea of codependency, because when I read about it and when I researched about it, I never felt codependent. Like I never felt like I couldn't survive without somebody. And so I was like, what the hell? But when she started talking about the super traits and how people who grow up in very chaotic houses, basically either there's kind of like they either become part of the dark triad personalities or they become empaths. It's how you deal with the chaos. And that I find it fascinating because it's about brain development. And basically the brain either does not develop in certain areas or it overdevelops and hyperdevelops in those same areas. And I think there's like 7 character traits, and one is agreeableness, responsibility. There's a few more. I can't remember all the others, but agreeableness and responsibility were 2 of the ones that I really identified with. Like I can get along with almost anybody. And I have this hyper sense of responsibility, like incredibly able to take on way more than anybody and do it well. Like I can, yeah. And basically in her research, people who have these super traits are basically like magnets for the dark triad, because it's just like the polarization theory, right? Like if my brain is hyper developed in these areas, the people whose brains are not developed are going to be attracted to me because we feel something together. We make we make a healthy brain, right? And I kept looking at all of these ways that I would attract people into my life that were more than happy to take advantage of my caring personality. And then accuse me of manipulation of that caring personality in caring for them and making them dependent on me because of my caring personality, which is just like the most maddening circular train of logic that I know, especially. And so what I realized is that the 2s, like even if I didn't have, and I probably because of my past have some characteristics of the 2s that are way more hyper developed than a typical 2, like just as we're all spectrums.
Right.
But even if I didn't have that, I would think that the 2s would still attract those people. Like if you're a healthy 2, the odds that you're going to attract people with the dark triad personalities are really high because of that giving, caretaking nature. Because that's what the dark triads need. Like that's their hardcore wounding. And it's going to take you a while to figure out that it's like what you're doing to take care of this person is actually feeding their pathology. It's not actually helping them or supporting them.
Yeah.
And then the dark side of the 2 is the covert narcissist, where they're then taking that caring and that support and all of those really lovely qualities, and then they're using those to actively. And the thing I've learned is that both malignant narcissists and covert narcissists aren't really conscious of what they're doing. It is a pure survival technique. Their brains are not, it's not like they're sitting there. Sociopaths and psychopaths will sit there and consciously calculate how to do this stuff. Narcissists and covert narcissists, for the most part, are just working off of impulse and reaction. And they're not consciously planning out how to destroy people's lives. They're just trying to, they're literally like underdeveloped, like toddlers, just walking with that level of brain development. And it's taken me a while to understand that. And so that's when I realized that
a lot of probably covert narcissists are probably type 2 Enneagram personalities who are just, they're taking all those lovely traits and they have to use them to control people, and that's how they get their supply.
Yep.
So you're either attracting them or you are one. And part of how I figured out how to it was because, like I said, I had several people in my past who have accused me of it, and I'm like, the one thing is that if you accuse a narcissist of being a narcissist, they deny it. I was curious. I was like, am I?
Yeah.
And so I was like, well, if I am, let me figure out, like, am I? Is this, am I this person? And yeah, I mean, when I'm in my dark part of my 2, I can definitely go into, and I can recognize when I get into some of that really manipulative, trying to get my needs met, controlling behavior. I always feel like shit when I'm doing it, though.
Yeah.
And so, and I can't do it for very long. I can't survive. Like, I'm in a really dark place if I'm doing that.
Right. It's total shadow. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, what I would like to do next, I'm going to come back to a couple of questions, but I want to jump over to your chart. And as I do with these, just kind of look for the overlap between Enneagram type. Just bear with me while I get my screen share set up, between Enneagram type and the astrological chart. Okay. Whoop, wrong one. Okay. Can you see that? Okay.
I'm probably because I'm on my phone.
What?
Probably because I'm on my phone.
Okay, you can't see it? Okay, hang on. Let me make sure I'm doing it right, because it's possible I don't have this set up right. Can you see that?
No.
Okay, I have to assume, gosh, I hope it's, okay, you should see it now. Oop. No, I want that one. Okay.
Oh, there we go.
Okay,
Yes.
good. Okay, I told you my tech skills were horrible. Okay, all right, let me get this little thingy out of there. Okay, so here we have your chart. So you are, as you mentioned, a Leo sun, Taurus rising, and your moon is in Libra. So it's mostly where I start with this. So let's go to the Leo. So your Leo is tempered by Saturn, right? So discipline, structure. I mean, I definitely heard that in, at the beginning of our chat with where I said I hear that strong 8 line. And you can feel it in talking to you. I mean, that fire is there, right? So and I think of 8 as a fiery kind of energy. Well, 2's fire too, in a different kind of way. And we have your Venus and your Mercury in there too, which I think is pretty cool. So, Venus is, we think of her as nourishing, right? And life-giving. So there's that 2 energy to Venus. And Mercury, the communicator, right? And first of all, you communicated your 2 beautifully. You're 2 in all, the facets of the Enneagram that you have access to. So you do communicate in this Venusian, passionate, heart-centered, fiery way that is also Leo, right? So that identity is seen in your chart. I would also say you feel it in your rising sign in, Taurus rising. Strong, powerful, amplified by Jupiter, right? Because you've got Jupiter in the first. So your passion, your exuberance, it comes through, right? And then we have your moon in Libra. And that balance and that wisdom, the tendency to be introspective and thoughtful, to go back to that 5 energy, that more internalized energy, to figure things out and bring it back to your 2, to that, again, that Leo sun, that Saturn, that Venus and Mercury, to bring back, to go to the deep and the darkness and come out with the information, to bring it back to the 2 home, which is in your 4th house, by the way, that sun and Saturn. So home and family, home and hearth, so to speak, right? And I think that came across as pretty central to who you are and how you grew up, I think, too, and what you brought of the way I see this, what you've brought of the ranch to the rest of the world, to the rest of us who don't get to be on a ranch, right? So yeah, I think that's definitely there in your chart. It definitely is in your Enneagram, as you so brilliantly shared today. So a couple of questions. What scares you?
Well, it's funny because this is actually going to go to the 4, and I think it must be part of the 2 too. But it's lack of connection.
Oh, well, definitely 4.
But it's interesting because I've gotten to the point now, I've realized that my whole life I've done everything I've done to connect and to be seen and to be loved. And I've been willing to sacrifice and to do all the work and to put up with a lot for the chance of connection. And I'm now at a point in my life where I've done enough work where I'm okay and I have connection with enough different types of people that if I need to be by myself, I'm okay. Like, I'm not willing anymore to just do whatever needs to be taken for a possibility of connection. Like, if you are in relationship with me, we are going to have take across the way. And I'm learning how to receive. That I'm realizing that's another protective mechanism, that it's much easier for me to give because I can control all things with the giving. And when you inevitably disappoint me, I'm not quite so hurt because it's only gone one way. I'm getting better at that. And I'm also realizing I'm demanding it. Like, I am no longer willing to be in relationship for the possibility that perhaps sometime in the future I might get something back in return. And if you're not able to engage with that with me, then that's fine. We're not going to be in relationship then.
Nice. Okay. What inspires you?
I guess the reason I'm having to think about that, I guess life inspires me. And I'm trying not to be cliche, and I'm trying not to be super obvious. I love people's stories, and I love watching people's stories evolve and change. And I just like watching and being a part of sometimes, and just being part of that whole dynamic. I mean, I was a history major in college because I loved the story of history and how we've evolved to the point that we are.
Mm.
And I'm curious about where we're going and how all of our individual evolutions contribute to the overall cultural evolution.
Nice. Okay. And one final question. How has the Enneagram changed your life?
I think part of my being able to step into my full two-ness was knowing that I was a two, and having wrestled and argued and vehemently tried not to be this for, 40 some years.
Yeah.
And people, as I moved in and out of it, I had people like you and other friends who were becoming, experts in it. And it was just like, it was one of those books or one of those gifts that kept getting given to me. And I'd be like, yeah, no, thank you. And I would put it back on the shelf. And then I would walk along my life for a little while. And then somebody else would hand me this. Oh, you have that? Let's hand that to you. And I'd be like, I do not want this. Thank you. And I would put it back on the shelf. And I joke that my Leo, I'm a hard-headed Leo, and I have that Taurus, so I'm like double stubborn.
Yeah.
And I will eventually get the point. You just kind of have to keep banging my head on it eventually. And at some point in the last 4 years, I was stumbling around, and I think it was one of your posts actually, because I think that was about the time that you started posting about stuff. And it was like, the gift bag landed back in my lap again. And this time I was like, well, shit. I keep ignoring this and I keep saying no, thank you. And I keep trying to not me. Maybe I should just actually take the gift and open it and see what's actually in it. Maybe there's a reason this keeps popping up in my life over and over and over again. And then that was when I think you and I had several conversations, and some of those conversations were catalysts for, you would ask a question and I'd be like, nah. oh, yeah. Oh, that's what that is. And it was always fun because you had no idea you would ask the question. You had no idea what you had set off in our conversations, because they're very sporadic and they're always lovely. But you would always say something or message me something, and I'd be like, oh, okay, we're just gonna let that be there for a while. And the way my brain works is that when things hit like that, it's in there. Yeah. And there is a part of my subconscious that is like, okay, somebody just gave us a little tiny morsel. We're going to look at this and analyze it. And we're just going to keep noodling on this until we know what to do with it.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, at some point, it finds its home and it slips in. And then it's like, oh.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. This is how this is working. And what I love is that I have a very rudimentary understanding of it. But every time you and I talk, I always feel like I'm being like, I don't know quite how this fits and how this works, but this is what I'm doing. And just like you did today, you're like, oh, well, that's that 5 line. And what I really liked is that you helped undemonize the 8, because in my world, the 8s were like, oh my God. Yeah. And then you're like, no, this is where your strong leadership and your strong take charge comes from all of that. And I'm like, oh, and I love how you are, there's just kind of like what I was talking about. There's just variations of the nuance of the number, right? Like nobody is ever all good and nobody is ever all bad. Like it's just you can move back and forth. And I remember we had the conversation about the 5, because you were laughing because I had told you I wanted to be a 5. And then you were like, do you have this strong 5 line? And it's like, that's actually how I solve all my problems is I go
Yeah.
to my 5
Yeah.
and I research the hell out of it.
Yep. Yeah.
And then once I figure it out, then you're right. I come back to the 2 and then we execute on the 2.
Yeah. Yeah. That learning about the invisible line was liberating for me because I'm in that 5 too. And yeah, it's a liberating way to see another level of our superpowers, so to speak, right? And we can go to the high or the low side of that. I joke with people, it's either my polite way of saying it is when you land on a type, you either have what I call an ick moment of, I do that and I really wish I didn't, and I can't deny it and I can't run away from it. Or the other side of it is the oh shit moment of, oh shit, that's me. So I love that you've had that experience around the 2 and that resistance to, because I had the same thing with my 5. I did not think I was a 5. I did not want to be a 5. I probably didn't fight it quite as hard as you, but pretty close. So yeah, I mean, that's what we call the growth point. That's where the learning really happens. I feel nothing in nature happens that we notice much without some level of struggle. And that's how we learn and grow. So, Stacey, this has been tremendous. Thank you so much for being here, for your time, for being so open and willing to share. Share your links one more time so everybody knows about the good things you do.
Sure. So my clinic is goodlifelongmont.com and the botanicals are goodlifebotanicals.com.
Okay. All right. Well, again, thank you very much for being here. Okay.
Thank you.
All righty.